In 1902, in the rural town of Belvidere, Illinois, young farmer Fred Chena attacked a family friend in her home, then returned to his own farm and went to bed. The next morning, Fred shot himself. Welcome to an audio version of an original article by Kathi Kresol, operator of Haunted Rockford Paranormal Events, Rockford, Illinois. This audio presentation is entitled Hidden in the Shadows and contains the 2025 story of the same name. This audio article is produced by Haunted Rockford. The legend of Blood's Point Cemetery in Boone County, Illinois has been shared for many generations. It is probably one of the most discussed legends in the whole area. The legend that is most often shared speaks of a witch named Beulah that lived and died near the cemetery back in the early days of settlement here in northern Illinois. The name Blood's Point came from the fact that a man named Arthur Blood bought the land to make his home here in the 1840s. His farm soon became prosperous and his family thrived. The legend of Witch Beulah is connected not only to the cemetery but the entire road. It has existed in the area for generations. This legend remains elusive. I have found a witch story about a girl named Beulah, but not in this location. I have not found any witch story along the road, nor anyone named Beulah buried here. I have interviewed dozens of people in the 2 decades I have been researching these legends. These folks have graciously shared their stories with me. These stories have included attacks by demon dogs, voices where there should be none, glimpses of an older woman at the edge of the cemetery, and a dark shadow that seems to lurk in the back corner where the shed used to stand. My goal is not to disprove or discount anyone's experience, but to investigate the origin of what took place here that could have led to these stories. And as is often the case, the truth of one of these stories is far more interesting than the legend. Perhaps in bringing this story back into the light, I can bring some peace to the dead that are buried in this place. Charles Chena and his wife Jane came to this area from Michigan to search for good farmland and to create a home for their family. He became a well-respected, successful farmer. Charles was also instrumental in helping develop the agricultural groups called Granges in northern Illinois. These Granges were a fraternal order that was vital in giving the small-town farmer a voice in the national agricultural policy decision-making process. Charles and Jane had 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son named Fred. Fred married a fine young woman, Mary Peel, in 1895, and the couple was excited to have their first child in 1900. But the baby girl, Frances, died at only 4 months old. Mary was devastated, and Fred did not know how to help his wife. Mary started spending a lot of time at the cemetery to be close to her little girl. Fred started spending a lot of time drinking. This caused many problems for the young couple. Fred tried to quit drinking and promised Mary many times that he would stop. But in the end, he always broke that promise. He just couldn't seem to help himself. Fred became better at keeping secrets about how much he was drinking. But there were other darker secrets that started to grow inside Fred. Fred and Mary purchased their own little farm and hired a young man to help with the work. The families knew each other, and the boy would stay overnight while he was helping Fred. The boy's mother, Jenny Hoyt, appreciated the extra money the Chena family paid the boy. On a hot August morning in 1902, Fred went into Belvidere. He knew his wife would be visiting the cemetery where their baby had been buried. But instead of joining Mary, Fred headed to the bar instead. He had quite a bit to drink again, and on the way home, Fred's other, darker side took over. Fred went to visit Jenny Hoyt, the mother of his farm hand. He knew she would be there alone. Fred attacked the young woman. She fought him off, and at one point, Fred seemed to come to his senses. He apologized and started to head for the door, but something stopped him. Fred turned, and Jenny would later report that when he turned, she did not recognize the man who stood before her. In that moment, she grew very frightened. Fred turned, and without acknowledging her pleas, he attacked her again. After the attack, Fred returned to his house. His wife, Mary, was surprised to find Fred in bed when she returned from the cemetery at 6 o'clock in the evening. She shook him, but soon realized Fred had been drinking again. That night, Fred tossed and turned all night, according to his wife. The next morning, he was up early. Mary noticed he grabbed the gun from behind the kitchen door. She found it odd that Fred went back upstairs with the gun, but thought maybe he was going to wake up the Hoyt boy to start the work. She went out to the barn to work on her own chores for the day. When Mary returned to the house, she smelled gunpowder and was frightened. Mary ran up the stairs, and when she opened the bedroom door, she was met with a horrible scene. Fred lay on the bed with his head completely gone. It took Mary a minute to realize what had taken place. Later, it would be determined that Fred had sat on the edge of the bed and removed his shoes and socks. He had placed the muzzle of the shotgun under his chin and used his toes to pull the trigger of the gun. There was another drama unfolding back in the village of Belvidere. The Belvidere chief of police, Richardson, was waiting in town for Fred to come to attend church. Richardson had issued an arrest warrant for Fred for the attack on Jenny the day before, but it was decided that it might prove safer to arrest Fred when the family came to church. It was less likely that Fred would be armed then. The news of the attack on Jenny and Fred's suicide shook everyone who thought they knew him. Some folks stated that his suicide spared the family of the shame of what he had done. But in truth, Fred only spared himself that shame. He was buried at Bloods Point Cemetery a few days after his death, but maybe he doesn't rest in peace. Maybe the darkness that some say exists at this little cemetery is the spirit of Fred, still hiding in the shadows, and still hoping no one sees the darkness that he kept hidden from even those who knew him best. This is the end of our audio article. Thanks for listening.